$14.8 million.
Which is just an absolute massive number.
Right. I mean, last year, that was the average cost of corporate noncompliance, $14.8 million.
Yeah.
And if that number doesn't immediately grab your attention, consider this. 70% of businesses suffered a third-party security incident in that exact same time frame.
Yeah, and that's the part that really keeps executives up at night.
Exactly. Because we are seeing these massive, globally recognized enterprises building, these impenetrable digital vaults. They are investing millions in cybersecurity.
Oh, easily millions.
Right, only to get completely breached because, I don't know, someone left a default password on a third-party vendor portal.
It's the ultimate illusion of operational security.
Yeah.
I mean, organizations feel protected because they've spent heavily on these very specific point solutions, but systemically, the enterprise is just completely exposed to anyone who knows where the gaps are.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to completely flip how you view GRC.
Governance, risk, and compliance.
Exactly. We are tearing down this really outdated notion that GRC is just some bureaucratic regulatory checkbox exercise that gets pawned off on the legal department.
Which is how most people still see it, unfortunately.
Right. But we are going to examine how it is actually a critical competitive advantage for you and your organization. We are pulling all of this from an incredibly comprehensive guide. It's titled The Strategic Roadmap to Modern GRC Program Implementation.
It's a fantastic resource.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because the landscape out there hasn't just shifted a little bit. It has completely fractured.
It really has. I mean, the pressure on organizations right now is unprecedented.
Yeah, like what specifically?
Well, just look at the SEC's new cybersecurity disclosure rules. They mandate reporting material incidents within 4 days. 4 days.
Yeah, that is almost no time to figure out what even happened.
Exactly. And then over in Europe, you've got the European Union's DORA mandate. That requires financial entities to definitively prove severe operational resilience.
Right.
So compliance is no longer this, once-a-year audit where everyone scrambles for 2 weeks and then forgets about it. It is a continuous real-time demand.
It has to be always on.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that the organizations surviving this immense regulatory pressure, they aren't just passing their audits by the skin of their teeth. They are actually embedding GRC into their operational DNA. They are making it a core metric of how they scale securely.
So whether you are prepping for some high-stakes strategy meeting right now, or maybe you are just insanely curious about how massive enterprises keep from collapsing under the weight of their own risk, this guide lays out an 8-step roadmap.
Think of it as your absolute blueprint for enterprise resilience.
A blueprint. I like that. And logically, I mean, you cannot defend a surface area that you haven't actually mapped out yet.
You can't. It's impossible.
Right. So the source material anchors the entire process in surveying the terrain and defining the strict boundaries of your operation.
Yeah, the guide refers to this as the assessment and scope phases. That's steps 1 and 2.
Okay, assessment and scope.
It is fundamentally about understanding the unique environment of the organization before you even think about buying software or writing new policies.
Right, before you spend a dime.
Exactly. You have to align your GRC goals with the actual strategic goals of the business.
That makes sense.
The text actually relies really heavily here on maturity models. Specifically, it points to the OSIG GRC capability model to help organizations figure out exactly where they're starting from.
And that model, from what I read, provides a pretty brutal mirror for leadership.
Oh, it absolutely does.
It outlines how companies move from the initial phase, which is where everything is super siloed, it's ad hoc, and IT is basically just running around reacting to fires all day.
Just constant firefighting.
Right. Moving from that all the way up the chain to optimized. And optimized is where risk monitoring is fully integrated, it's automated, and it's continuously improving.
That's the holy grail right there.
But I do have to push back a little on the practicality of this initial assessment phase.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we are mapping out the entire risk landscape, I'm talking strategic risks, operational failures, supply chain disruptions, ransomware, geopolitical instability, doesn't this just become a massive, overwhelming list of doom?
A list of doom. I like that.
Seriously. If I'm a chief risk officer looking at all the possible ways a multinational company can fail on any given Tuesday, that sounds like a recipe for total organizational paralysis.
Yeah, you've hit on the exact trap that stalls most GRC implementations right out of the gate.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Companies try to boil the ocean, They want a perfect, unified view of every single risk across a global enterprise on day one.
Which is impossible.
Completely impossible. The source material counters this by emphasizing strict scoping. You prevent that paralysis through aggressive right sizing.
Right sizing.
Instead of mapping the whole world all at once, you anchor your focus areas.
Give me an example of that.
So maybe your biggest immediate threat is third-party vendor risk. So you start right there. You define the essential components, you map the data flows for your vendors, establish the controls.
Right.
And then, only then, you expand incrementally into enterprise risk management or general IT security as the organization's maturity actually grows.
I see. So you build the map one region at a time.
You build it region by region, yes,
Yeah.
ensuring that each new area integrates seamlessly with your overall business model.
That makes it way less daunting.
It does. Plus, you secure a few early wins to prove the value of the GRC program to the board before you try to tackle the entire global operation.
Okay, so we have drawn the map of our risks, and we've scoped out the borders of our initial expedition.
Mm-hmm.
But a map is completely useless if no one is steering the ship.
Right.
And an expedition will just fall apart without a strict code of conduct.
Very true.
So who actually owns these risks when things go horribly wrong? That brings us to the structural backbone of the roadmap, which is steps 3 and 4, governance and policies.
Yeah, governance is essentially the architecture of human accountability.
I like that phrasing.
The text uses the 3 lines model to establish this.
Okay, break that down for us.
Sure. So your first line of defense is operational management. These are the people actually executing the daily work and taking the risks on the front lines.
Like the sales team or the developers?
Exactly. Then the second line is the oversight function. This is your risk and compliance teams, and their job is to monitor that first line.
Okay, got it.
And finally, the third line is internal audit. They provide independent assurance to the executive board that the first 2 lines are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
That sounds great in theory.
Right. But the mechanism that makes this theoretical model actually function in reality is the RSCI matrix.
Ah, yes. The RSCI matrix. I know the source text leans really hard into RSCI.
It does.
That's mapping out who is responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for every single process. And tell me if I'm wrong here, in my experience, doesn't mapping out every single role in a sprawling matrix just create massive bureaucratic bloat?
It definitely can.
Because I've seen people end up spending way more time updating spreadsheets and arguing over who is consulted versus informed than actually fixing the underlying risks.
Oh, it absolutely becomes bureaucratic bloat if it is treated as an HR exercise rather than a risk exercise.
Okay, so how do we avoid that?
The critical mechanism in the RSCI matrix, and the whole reason the text insists on it, is the hard, non-negotiable distinction between responsible and accountable.
Yeah.
The person who is responsible is just the one doing the hands-on work.
Right.
But the person who is accountable is the one whose head is on the block if the outcome fails.
The buck stops there.
Exactly. If you do not legally and structurally define accountability before an incident happens, then when a massive data breach hits, you get the classic corporate response.
Which is everyone just pointing fingers at other departments.
Exactly.
Let's ground that in a real-world scenario so you can see what we mean. Imagine an employee gets fired.
Okay.
Human Resources assumes IT revokes their system access, but IT assumes HR triggered the automated offboarding protocol.
A classic miscommunication.
Right. That operational gap where everyone assumes someone else is accountable is exactly how you get a disgruntled ex-employee logging in from their couch and deleting your primary customer database.
That is the perfect illustration of a control gap. And it is exactly why the text emphasizes that governance must be driven by executive sponsorship.
Not just a middle manager.
Right. This is not about the CEO simply approving a software budget for a new tool. It is about setting a cultural tone from the very top that dictates accountability is non-negotiable.
So what does this all mean? It means that if you jump straight into writing corporate policies without doing the hard work of establishing that governance first, you are setting yourself up for failure.
100%.
Because policies without clear governance are like speed limits with no traffic cops, no cameras, and no consequences. They are essentially just suggestions.
Yeah, and the text outlines that once that governance is set, those policies have to be formalized and explicitly mapped to heavy-hitting external frameworks.
We're talking about the big ones.
Oh, yeah. We are talking about utilizing NIST as a standardized blueprint for identifying and isolating cyber threats. We're looking at COBIT for overall IT governance, or ISO 2701, which dictates the exact granular protocols for how sensitive data must be encrypted, stored, and accessed.
And crucially, these frameworks can't just be translated into some massive 500-page compliance binder that sits on a shelf in the legal department collecting dust.
Which happens all the time.
All the time. The policies have to be mapped to internal functional controls. They need to dictate your actual incident response times, your daily data privacy handling, your actual vendor onboarding processes.
And they must be accessible to the employees who actually need them, with strict version control, by the way.
Oh, version control is huge.
A policy from 3 years ago is honestly worse than having no policy at all because it creates a completely false sense of security based on outdated threats.
Okay, so we've got the map, we've got the captain, and we have the rule book. Now, the organization has to actually turn the key in the ignition.
Time to drive.
Right. How do we actively hunt for threats and measure if these frameworks are actually working in the real world? Here's where it gets really interesting. The roadmap transitions into the engine of GRC. Risk assessment and continuous monitoring. That's steps 5 and 6.
And the assessment mechanism the text relies on here is plotting risks on a heat map based on 2 axes. Likelihood versus impact.
Okay.
So you evaluate how probable a specific threat is, that's likelihood. And then you calculate the financial, operational, or reputational damage it would cause if it actually materialized. That's the impact.
And the source material lists 4 strategic responses once a risk is plotted on that map. You can mitigate it, transfer it, avoid it, or accept it.
Right.
Now, assuming we all know the basics, mitigating means implementing controls, avoiding means just halting the risky activity altogether. I want to zero in on the 2 that companies so often misunderstand, transferring and accepting.
They get those wrong a lot.
Let's start with transferring. Transferring a risk doesn't mean the risk just vanishes.
Right. Not at all. Transferring risk is fundamentally a financial and legal maneuver. You aren't eliminating the vulnerability in your system. You are simply shifting the financial burden of the impact.
Okay, how do you do that?
The primary mechanisms for this are cyber insurance policies, or really strict indemnification clauses embedded in your vendor contracts.
Got it.
So if a breach happens, the operational headache is still totally yours to deal with. But the financial bleeding, that becomes the responsibility of the insurer or the third party.
That makes sense. And what about accepting a risk? Is that just corporate jargon for crossing our fingers, ignoring a known vulnerability and hoping the SEC doesn't notice?
No. If we connect this to the bigger picture, accepting risk is actually a highly calculated strategic decision.
Right.
It means you are actively choosing to tolerate a specific vulnerability, but only within strictly defined thresholds. You accept it because you have done the math, and the financial or operational cost of mitigating that risk dramatically outweighs the potential impact.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's the equivalent of deciding not to spend $1,000 on a biometric safe just to protect a $50 watch.
Precisely. It is calculated tolerance. But the key here is that accepted risks do not just disappear into the ether.
They don't just go away.
Right. They are formally logged in the risk register, an accountable owner is assigned, and they are continuously monitored to ensure the underlying variables haven't shifted over time.
Because things change.
Exactly. If the value of that $50 watch suddenly skyrockets to $50,000, your risk response has to change immediately. You can't just keep accepting it.
Which brings us perfectly into the monitoring phase.
Yeah.
Step 6. You need instrumentation to tell you if your risk environment is shifting.
You definitely do.
And I really love the distinction the text makes here between KRI's key risk indicators and KPI's key performance indicators. I look at this a lot like the dashboard of a car.
That is an excellent way to frame it. Break down how you see the difference.
Okay, so KRIs are the check engine light. They are your early warning radar looking outward at the threat environment. They tell you a risk is escalating before the engine catches fire.
Right.
For example, a KRI might track the volume of unauthorized login attempts on your network, or the security ratings of your key vendors. If a critical vendor's security rating suddenly drops from an A to a C, your KRI is flashing red.
The historic Target data breach is actually the textbook example of a KRI failure.
Oh, really? Tell me about that.
Yeah. Target's HVAC vendor was compromised, and because that vendor had credentials that linked back to Target's billing network, the attackers moved laterally and stole 40 million credit card numbers.
Just staggering.
Right, and if Target had aggressive KRIs monitoring third-party network access anomalies, that check engine light would have been absolutely blinding before the breach ever escalated.
Exactly. Now, KPIs, on the other hand, they're the speedometer and the tachometer. They look inward. They tell you how efficiently your GRC engine itself is actually running. A KPI tracks your internal performance, like, say, the average number of days it takes your engineering team to patch a known critical vulnerability.
Oh, very important metric.
Right. If your KPI shows it takes your team 6 months to deploy a basic security patch, your internal process is fundamentally broken, regardless of what the external threats are doing.
The synergy between the two is where true maturity lies. KIIs tell you a storm is coming. KPIs tell you if your ship is sturdy enough to sail through it.
I love that.
But as robust as these dashboards, heat maps, and RCI matrices are, they are ultimately just theoretical constructs operated by human beings.
Which is the perfect pivot to the next phase of the roadmap, steps 7 and 8, the human element and future-proofing.
Yep.
Because humans are, historically and statistically, the weakest link in any security or compliance architecture. You can have the best ISO 27001 policies in the entire world, but if an employee clicks a phishing link in an email, the vault opens.
It does. And the text addresses this by completely dismantling the traditional approach to corporate training.
I'll be honest, when I read this section on promoting training and awareness, my immediate reaction was to roll my eyes.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Mandatory annual compliance training is literally the corporate equivalent of getting a dental cleaning.
It is painful.
Everyone dreads it. You click through the generic slideshow as fast as humanly possible. You take a multiple-choice quiz where the answers are incredibly obvious, and then you completely forget the material the very next day.
The source material entirely agrees with you there. The click-through model is broken. It's performative compliance.
So what's the fix?
The solution provided is the concept of building a human firewall through tiered, highly contextualized, role-based training. You cannot just give the same generic data privacy module to your entire workforce.
Because the risks they interact with are fundamentally different.
Exactly. Your software development team requires intensive, really granular training on secure coding practices, API vulnerabilities, access control management. But your sales and marketing teams, they don't need to know a single thing about API endpoints. They need targeted training on how to handle sensitive client data during a public pitch, or how to identify a highly sophisticated phishing email that is masquerading as a vendor invoice.
That makes total sense.
The training absolutely must simulate the specific daily reality of the employee who is taking it.
And the text also touches on gamifying this learning process.
Right.
Running department-wide security competitions or simulated phishing campaigns where employees are actually rewarded for flagging suspicious emails.
Positive reinforcement.
Exactly. The goal is to build a true see something, say something culture. If a junior analyst spots a glaring control gap in how financial data is shared, they shouldn't be terrified of getting a senior manager in trouble. The system should empower them to raise the flag.
You want compliance to transition from a periodic chore dictated by the legal team into a shared operational responsibility.
When the interns and the C-suite both understand their specific role in defending the enterprise, your systemic risk just plummets.
It really does.
Right.
But this raises an important question regarding the final phase of the roadmap, continuous evolution.
Okay.
What happens when the business model fundamentally changes? Because GRC cannot remain static.
Well, let's talk about mergers and acquisitions, for example.
Great example.
A company spends 3 years reaching that optimized OSEG maturity level we talked about. They have their KRIs perfectly tuned, and then boom, the CEO acquires a massive competitor.
Overnight.
Overnight, the meticulously mapped risk profile from step 1 is completely obsolete.
Because when you acquire a company, you aren't just buying their revenue stream. You are inheriting their technical debt, their undocumented legacy systems, their unpatched servers, and usually their broken corporate culture.
You inherit all the bad stuff, too.
All of it. The roadmap mandates that GRC must be deeply embedded in the M&A due diligence process. You evaluate their risk register before the deal closes, not after.
And even beyond M&A, the business itself just evolves naturally. The text stresses the need to aggressively evaluate and retire low-value processes.
You have to constantly ask yourself, is this control actually mitigating a relevant threat? Or is it just bureaucratic bloat left over from 5 years ago?
Right.
As organizations scale, the reliance on manual controls, like having a manager physically sign off on user access reviews, it just becomes unsustainable.
It slows everything down.
It does. The goal is to identify those manual bottlenecks and automate them. You transition to continuous control monitoring, where software automatically validates that access protocols are functioning 24/7.
And rather than relying on an auditor to sample 50 random files once a year.
Exactly.
So to synthesize this entire journey for you, What the source material has laid out is a radical reframing.
Yeah.
GRC is not about dodging regulatory fines.
No.
It is not about keeping auditors happy. It is about aligning your governance structures directly with your growth strategy. It is about building resilient systems that can rapidly identify threats, assign clear human accountability, and adapt to shifting environments.
Resilience is the ultimate goal here. An organization that deeply understands its risk appetite, empowers its human firewall, and continuously monitors its operational engine is an organization that can innovate aggressively.
They can move fast without the fear of breaking things because they know exactly where their guardrails are.
Exact.
So you now hold the blueprint. You understand the mechanisms behind the frameworks, the critical difference between transferring and accepting risk, and why a RACI matrix is a legal necessity rather than just another spreadsheet. You know how to take GRC, which most of the corporate world views as a burden, and operationalize it into a distinct competitive advantage. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over something that pushes the boundaries of the source material we just covered.
I suspect we are heading into the territory of emerging technology and the paradox it presents.
Exactly. The text talks extensively about pushing toward that optimized maturity level. It advocates for relying heavily on automation, continuous monitoring, and eventually AI-driven risk scoring. Here is the provocative thought for you to explore. What happens when artificial intelligence truly takes the wheel of the GRC engine? Imagine a fully autonomous GRC platform that constantly monitors the corporate environment. It detects a vulnerability, calculates the likelihood and impact on a dynamic heat map, and decides to automatically accept that risk on behalf of the company because its algorithm determines the cost of mitigation is mathematically inefficient.
It is the ultimate evolution of automated decision-making.
But what if the algorithm gets it wrong? What if that specific AI-accepted risk results in a catastrophic multi-million-dollar data breach?
Wow.
Who is ultimately held accountable? Do you pull up the RCI matrix and point the finger at the chief risk officer for trusting the system? Do you blame the vendor who built the AI? Or does accountability simply vanish into the black box of the algorithm?
It fundamentally breaks the traditional governance models we've just spent this entire deep dive discussing.
It completely breaks them.
The technology is moving faster than our definitions of legal and moral responsibility.
It really does. It is one thing to strategically build a digital vault and assign a human to guard the door. It is another thing entirely when the vault itself starts deciding which doors to leave open.
That is a lot to think about.
It is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.